just gonna wait for like a minute to allow everyone to connect. But in the meantime, I would like to introduce myself. I am Kuselwa, and I am from the GCE Secretariat and work in the role of being the Knowledge Exchange and Learning Manager. I'm based in Johannesburg. And today I'm going to be moderating this session. And I'm holding in for Vicky, who's actually joining us today as a participant. Just a quick housekeeping information. We hosting this session in English, but there is interpretation available in French, Portuguese, Arabic, and Spanish. So if you could please go ahead and make a selection on your preferred language while we are settling in, and we would also appreciate it if you could introduce yourself in the chat box, and so that we can get acquainted in the process of actually delivering this session. And I would like now to officially welcome you to our third lesson of the GCE Youth Online Learning Program. So this learning program was launched on the 13th of February, and it's part of our project, which is funded by the United Nations Democratic Fund, the 16th round of that funding. And as GCE, we are implementing a project under this funding framework, which is called Youth Leadership Program for the implementation of the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development Goals. And our goal through this project is really to create intentional spaces and platforms for young people to be able to be in the forefront of advocacy actions, both within the GCE movement and externally, in driving the realization of the right to education and the realization of the Sustainable Development Goals, and especially the goal on education. So we started this online learning program with a lesson focusing on understanding the UN structures for youth advocacy, and that happened on week 1 on the 13th. And it was followed by a lesson focusing on using research as a tool for advocacy. And that happened last week, which was second week. This week, we are exploring thematic topics, and our focus is on thematic advocacy issues from the perspectives and experiences of young people. And our special focus is, of course, on inclusive education, but we are tackling it from the angle of using digital tools for education and inclusion of excluded groups due to emergencies and conflict in education, as well as integrating gender mainstreaming in education. So those are the 3 thematic areas that we're looking at exploring today under the umbrella of inclusive education. So as a result, we have a packed agenda for you, and that is made up of a mix of expert presentations and case studies from our young panel. And we also have young people that are here today to share with us their on-the-ground experience, as well as life experiences around these thematic issues that we're talking about today. I will quickly give you an outline of how this session will flow. And with that being said, we will start this session with 2 expert presentations on digital education and adoption of digital tools. For that, we have a panel of 2 presenters that has really kindly accepted our invitation to come join us today, even though they've got busy schedules. One is Abedin, who's joining us from Nigeria, and he is a global director of Brain Builders Youth Development Initiative. And the second one is Rhonda, who has been part of the GCE family since 2021. and she works as an independent EdTech expert. And we look forward in advocacy. And from these two presentations, we are going to gain a better understanding of how digital education and digital tools can aid or hinder the provision of the right to inclusive education. So these two presentations will be followed by a question, by a discussion, as well as interaction. We've got a live quiz that we are going to share with you so that you remain engaged throughout that session. After that, we are going to have a second session that will focus on sharing practices, experiences, and lessons from also young people who have been champions in advocating and taking actions towards advancing the provision of inclusive education. And that with that hope, the focus will be on practices from the provision of education in states of emergencies, as well as how we can continue mainstreaming gender in global advocacy. For that, we in Kenya, and she is going to share her experience and lessons from interventions that her organization has been working on in terms of bridging the gap by providing access to higher education opportunities for high school graduates living in Kakuma refugee camp in Kenya. And then for the gender mainstreaming part, we are going to have Linda, who is part of the UNESCO Youth SDG4 network. And Linda is going to share how we can continue gender mainstreaming into global advocacy, and especially the one that is youth-led. So that session will also be followed by 15 minutes discussion, but and as well as we will open up the mic as well for you to be able to engage with our panel. So without spending a lot of time, that is an outline of how this session is gonna go. Right now, I would like to hand over to Abedin to take his 15 minutes of the presentation. So over to you, Abedin.
Thank you so much, Kusewa, and I sincerely appreciate you. So thank you so much to the Global Campaign for Education as well for those in the nonprofit sector today. Let me say happy non-governmental organization day. I think today is World NGO Day. So thank you so much for being resilient. Thank you for the efforts that you do in your community, and most especially the impact you are making around, education globally. So I've been asked to, talk about youth-led advocacy for digital education and digital school tools, and I'm going to be using our organization as a case study. Our organization has been, receiving support from the Global Campaign for Education for a couple of years. We've received support on EduTech. We're currently, working around different advocacy with both national and regional youth organization presently, and we have worked on different researches before as well. So the objective of this course would be, we want to understand in the next 15 to 20 minutes the integration of education technology in our education system, and we are going to be providing practical tools on how we as young person and as student can be involved in advocacy for digital education. I quite understand that we've had opportunity to talk or to read about different opinion as far as digital school tools and digital education is concerned. I will start by first breaking our emotions and asking us, why is digital education important? Let's flash back to the era of COVID-19. When COVID-19 came on board, it caught a lot of country as a shock, especially in the global south, where, internet penetration is low, and, it really affected a lot. And particularly in Nigeria, it also increased the number of out-of-school children. So it can overcome geographical barriers. For example, if you need to travel miles like 50 kilometers or 20 kilometers, as is witnessed in some community, or 10 kilometers before you have access to a primary or secondary education. A digital education will give you an opportunity to have access to, the resources, the curriculum, the literacy and the numeracy skill right there in your own room within the confine of where exactly you are, and thereby it has break that geographical barrier. Then, of course, the pace at which we learn is different. The pace at which we assimilate is also different. Digital education also gives room to personalized learning experience. Maybe, for example, I might have difficulty in learning. As a result of that, I could learn at my own pace. I could, take some of those courses at my own pace based on my own personal peculiarity. Then, of course, lastly, it will keep students with the skills that they need to thrive in the digital age. Like I've always said, when I have opportunity to discuss digital education or edutech, I always say the way we have oil in Nigeria as our natural resources, digital platform has come to stay, and digital is the new oil in terms of resources. So, of course, like I explained earlier, it will also give us an opportunity to have an essential 21st century skill. I'm giving case study of Global South because that's where I come from and that's where I work majorly. If you look at, our education curriculum, if you look at, after we graduated and some of us are of course to travel to advanced countries like the US, UK, Canada, Germany, et al. The skills of some of our graduates cannot be placed on equal pedestal with those who are here just because we do not have access to, the tools and, the critical thinking or the digital literacy skills that they have access to. In doing this digital education, those who are, opponents of digital education, I've got a lot of, points to say, oh, fine, digital education is something that we are not yet mature for in Africa, that cannot work. They have every reason to talk about it. But of course, I'm coming today to this class, which I will also be explaining in the later part of my class, to let us see how a non-governmental organization in Nigeria, supported by the Global Campaign for Education, has been playing our own part in our own little way to make this work. When COVID-19 came on board, through the support of JCO, we did a policy brief that recommends, in clear terms, what the Nigerian government could do as far as digital education is concerned. I'm happy to tell us that nothing less than 6 states has adopted the policy brief and have integrated digital education into their budgetary provision and as well as been working. And this has increased the number of enrollments in school and has also increased the numeracy and literacy rates of the students. So for those who talk about the challenges as far as digital education is concerned, they talk about infrastructure. Believe you me, of course, I know about, the internet penetration and connectivity in Africa and electricity as well. And I know the same way we have that challenges in Nigeria, it's almost universal across different African countries. But, we have two choices. Is either we continue to talk about the issues or we try to find in our own little way, what are the ways through which we can provide recommendations or solutions. Then, of course, we'll talk about, teachers training as well. If you look at it, every investment are not made in equipping our teachers. Some teachers, the school notes they use while they are teaching in 16th, 17th, 18th, 19th, and 20th century. You see what they are using in this century. The teaching pedagogy has changed. And as a result of that, some are even old and, could not operate a tablet or a computer system or integrate themselves into technology. I quite agree as well, that could be a challenge. Then content and resources. How do we make sure that the content and resources that we are using to teach digital education or to incorporate digital education into our curriculum and teaching could compete favorably among community of nations globally? Then the cost and affordability. What's the financial implication for internet access for marginalized community, affordability of the technology, iPad tablet for those in the grassroots community. But beyond the challenges, there is an opportunity for technology in education. All of us, we all know, we have the big name in the news now, which is the artificial intelligence that are, could personalize learning and online platform. And if you look at it from the perspective of, those who ordinarily would not have had access to education, but through USSD code, because this was also practiced in Nigeria as well as a result of, the policy brief recommendation that we gave. We said it's not all about using an Android phone to power an edutech technology or using an iPad tablet or a computer for education technology. As simple as a USSD code is, it could be codified for people to learn. And it's not absolute, it shouldn't even be conditioned to only maybe young person or students. There could be an adult learning that is translated into local languages to ensure that, the last goal of the sustainable development goals, which has to do with leaving no one behind, is achieved. So exciting opportunity like VR, AR, bringing learning to life, AI, as, giving us opportunity that there's a transformation that could happen with that. Like, for example, look at AI. Despite the fact that, it has its own negative aspect, either we like it or not, artificial intelligence has also come to play. And that's the reason why you see different organizations, different non-profit organizations, businesses, individuals, even academic institutions are learning ways through which they can, make AI make work easier. We're not saying, of course, people should just plagiarize AI. AI, absolutely. Even if you're not smart enough, you might not be able to use AI for your personalized learning or to cater for your individual needs, because it's all about learning the prompting. So that's why you will see that a lot of organizations are integrating AI into anything they do now, acknowledging that, of course, platforms like ChatGPT has come to play, and looking for ways through which, of course, even if you use GPT for me for an assignment, maybe in classes as well, I'm able to know or decipher if that platform has been used. Then, of course, mobile learning. Mobile learning has been offering flexibility and accessibility. Mobile learning, like what we are planning at Brain Builders Youth Development Initiative, there's a project that we call School on the Wheel. Wherein, of course, we have a big luxury bus, install, television and access to internet with some computers and tablets. Then we go to that grassroots community, which ordinarily would not have access to internet. We go with our own mobile phone and, encourage mobile learning. That way, regardless of your location, regardless of where exactly you are, education reaches everyone. So I want us to remember something very cogent. That, of course, as we talk about all these exciting opportunities, technology is a tool to enhance learning. Like we're having this conversation from, different part of the world, from US to Europe to different African countries, just because of technology as well. So the way they are essential, the way Zoom is essential for us to have this conversation is the way, technology is also essential for meaningful education. Then, of course, I've talked about AI. Then the other aspect is the online learning management platform that, different organizations have been using as well, which encourages online discussion. And another thing that excites me about, these classes is the fact that GC has, made it all engaging by ensuring that even after classes, there will be exercise, there will be quizzes as well, thereby, stimulating, that interaction that would have happened if we are having this conversation physically as well. Then I talked about mobile learning, then virtual reality and augmented reality. Then, how can we contribute and what can we do? Young people, as young person, we have the numbers in the world. Young person contributes more than 50% to the population. Across different platforms like Transforming Education at African Union, United Nations General Assembly, United Nations ECOSOC Youth Forum, at any platform that we have. As young person, we have the power, we have the competence, we have the capacity, and we have the character to push or drive for the needed change that we need in education. We can all be an advocate for digital education. But before we be an advocate as well, we all need to look at the peculiarity. What are the issues? Because those we want to discuss this with as well want us to communicate in clear terms within few minutes. What data is available for us that could support the advocacy for digital education? That is where research comes in. And of course, this year also conducted an edutech research that could be a tool that is useful for us. How do we raise an awareness across our social media platform and across engagement with members of our parliament or, with our governors and presidents as the need may be? How can we engage critical stakeholders and as well use our social media to push for the needed change? Then why youth advocacy and how? Believe you me, whatever policy any government or any institutions are doing today, youth will be directly or indirectly impacted by that policy. Because, of course, they sometimes could be septuagenarian or octogenarian. Whatever policy they are formulating now will definitely have effect in the next 5 years, 10 years, 20 years. So we are adequately affected by this. Then, in carrying out advocacy as well, aside the fact that I talked about the fact that we need data, we need to raise an awareness, we can organize policy dialogue with those critical stakeholders. So let them know what the issues are. Sometimes, activism is not all about protest. Sometimes we could engage in an intellectual conversation for us to lobby them ethically to ensure that some of our things get done. Then there's a need for us to activate the power of collaboration by connecting with other youth organizations and experts and decision makers that could make, our advocacy for this digital education realized. So connecting with them and, collaborating and not competing will make us troubleshoot issues and learn from, others as well. Like, for example, others will be sharing conversation based on their own peculiarity in their own country as this conversation goes on. So one or two things could be picked to build our own network and, change the trend of the way we do things. Then organizing workshops and training sessions is also extremely important in advocacy. Because as an advocate, you need to be empowered with the necessary resources, tools, knowledge, and data for you to be able to carry out. So organizing workshops like this and training sessions and awareness campaign will go a long way, in building our capacity for that. Example of youth-led intervention that has really worked in education technology. The Malala Fund advocate for child education globally. The STEM training by Brain Builders, the development initiative, and the EduTech campaign that we led in Nigeria that has led to different resources and different policy changes. The UNICEF's Innovation Fund resources, the UNESCO Youth Mobile Initiative, the Global Youth Coalition for Education, the Ubongo's Learning Education Games in Tanzania, different creative methodology. If we also look at it in EduTech field now, the gamification is the new thing that a lot of organizations are talking about. We have the AI for Good Summit as well, the Global Campaign for Education, advocacy that they have been pushing for the last few years, as well as some of example of youth-led education intervention that we could refer to. So I will end this conversation by saying the best time for us to have started our advocacy journey for EduTech was yesterday. The next best time for us is now. GCE has made this platform available. And of course, I also know that GCE has a platform where you can have access to more than enough resources to carry out this. So I join you as, leaders of different youth and student-led movement to please, hit the ground running for advocacy for education technology so that we will ensure that no child, regardless of his socio-cultural or socio-political belief, regardless of his or her location, regardless of, the level of poverty of his or her parents, have access to the same quality of education that his or her counterparts have access to among Committee of Nations. So thank you so much, and I will give an opportunity for questions now. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Abedin, for that informative presentation. I think it is very clear that Brain Builders have been really championing the work around EdTech in Nigeria, and I think the impact of it is definitely seen on the ground. We've been seeing it from our side, and I think it's amazing to see how the innovative approaches that you have employed in driving advocacy on this. And you've mentioned something very important in your presentation, which is taking into consideration of the context, and also like when it comes to really rolling out interventions and advocacy actions around introducing education in technology in education, considering what qualifies as technology in the context that you are working on. And because, like you said, us being connected here today, it is also another win. And in a small village, somewhere maybe having one computer in a classroom would qualify as that, while others in the context in which they work on, they probably driving, actions that are demanding that every classroom is equipped with, good infrastructure that allows, each child to have their own resources when it comes to realizing EdTech. So I think that was very important. And I think also what you mentioned about really engaging impacted groups when we are talking about inclusive education. If we want to advance our advocacy wins, we need to engage the groups that are affected the most. And if there are policy gaps, we need to hear from those that are really, dealing with those effects of those gaps. And I think it is quite powerful that you have integrated that in your advocacy in Nigeria, and also building on existing strong networks. That is also another amazing practice that I think as GCE, of course, we've been all about driving that and ensuring that we provide a platform that elevates, these different interventions across the world. And now I'm just gonna see if we've got any hands up and if there were any questions that were posed during your presentation. So I can see that there is a hand up from Ruth. And I'm gonna go ahead, Ruth, and allow you to ask your question. And in the meantime, we are also going to launch a poll so that we can see how engaged were you with Aberdeen's presentation, and see if you are able to kind of like give us an idea of whether the information that has been shared with you was clear. So, okay, Ruth, I see your hand now is down. Do you have a hand up or not? Okay, if anyone has a hand, please make sure that it stays up. I can see your hand is down, Ruth. But okay, moving on then, I'm gonna go ahead and launch the poll. And I hope you can be able to contribute. And in the meantime as well, you can just make sure that you drop us questions for Aberdeen and raise a hand if you've got a specific question for Aberdeen from his presentation. Okay, so in our poll, we have 2 questions that we would like you to help us in terms of determining. Okay, so the questions, we've translated the questions, they're available in French and Portuguese. Please let me know if you can see the poll now. It should be live. I have launched it. And if you could please take 2 minutes to just complete or contribute to the poll, and we will publish the results of the poll. And once we close it. So I'm gonna now just allow, okay, there is a hand up from Israel who would like to have a question to Aberdeen. So Israel, I'm going to allow you to talk, please. While the poll is running, can I hand over to you to share your comment, your remark, or your question?
Thank you. Thank you. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you, Israel.
Thank you. Thank you. Well, I'm Israel from CLADE, from the Latin American Campaign for the Right to Education. Thank you, Aberdeen, for your presentation. And my question is, we all know that the private sector plays a huge role in the digital sector, right? You have all the big techs, we have OpenAI, Google, and all these companies, and they are interested in also playing a role in digital education and providing digital tools. We have Zoom, we have Google Classroom, we have many others. So by advocating for digital education, how can we avoid privatization and also advocate for data privacy and digital sovereignty as well? I think this was maybe not well mentioned, was not well deepened in the presentation, and maybe Aberdeen, you could provide some explanation on that.
Thank you so much for that brilliant question, Israel. I quite agree with you. You quite agree with me that 15 minutes is such a short time, so I wanted to cover a lot within the short time as well. So let me bring it from the aspect of, online safety as far as digital education is concerned as well, because another conversation that will also come up is the fact that, when we start using some of these digital school tools, how safe is it for our kids as well to, explore some of this digital technology? And that's the reason why, collaborations and conversations have been going on globally now as regards, issues of data privacy. And, organizations, corporate, private, and public organizations have been integrate and localize their GDPR law. We're talking about digital sovereignty as well. A major impediment that will affect, the growth of an integration of digital education is if this is being used as a tool to wreak havoc as well, and a lot of people are not safe. Because, the adoption of even digital tools, not even digital education now, across different global South countries is still low as a result of trust. So there might be a need for us as well to talk to the private sector. And of course, I'm charging JC and others on this call, especially makers of some of these tools, those who produce Android phones, those who produce laptops, those who produce iPad tablets as well, to ensure that, when some of these tools are being manufactured or produced as well, issues around privatization, data privacy, and digital sovereignty are being taken into cognizance. So, of course, it will be a part of what the leg we are going to add to our advocacy, but we should not just let that one limit us. Like I always tell people as well, when we start advocacy, it creates an open day that will not have its own advantages and disadvantages. So troubleshooting, that's why in advocacy, we do what we call stakeholder mapping analysis to know who are those that might be interested in us and support us. What are the obstacles that we may encounter? What narrative do we need to sell to the category of the private sector who makes money from producing some of these things as well? Then what counter narrative can we sell as well for those who are not proponents of some of these things, conversations that we are having as well? So thank you so much, Israel. I hope that answers your question.
Yes, it does.
Thank you so much, Israel, for your awesome, great. Thank you so much, Israel, and thank you, Aberdeen, for attending to that. We do not have another hand up, so I'm just going to go ahead and end the poll, and then we can look at the results quickly before we can hand over to our next presenter. I can see she is in the house, Rhonda. So before we move on to that, we can just have a look quickly at the results of our poll. So the first question was about which of the following pose as a challenge in integrating digital education into education systems. And then we had a CAPRA structure, and the second was limited teacher training. And the third was inadequate digital resources. And then we had all of the above as well. So I think we can agree that from the presentation that Aberdeen has shared, some of those appeared in it, and we're hoping that some of those will also appear from Rhonda's presentation before we launch the poll, but it's all right. But I think we can agree that all of those that have been listed actually can pose a challenge. Obviously, I think what Aberdeen has mentioned as well in his presentation, depending on the context it's in which the digital tools are being introduced. And
Sorry,
then
please, can I have just 60 seconds to answer the question I'm seeing in Q&A? I saw that the question came up in the Q&A section, please.
Okay.
Thank you.
So is that the question in the chat box?
Yes, it's in Q&A. It's saying, how do we aim to achieve an education system that is up to date with the 4IR of digital education when most African countries are economically failing to provide the basic necessity needed for learners to get adequate education and in most cases access to education as a whole? How can we close the gap that is already within our education system? Thank you so much for that brilliant conversation. I will just talk about the key points. One of the best ways to do a public-private partnership, we need to foster collaboration within government and private sector. Then we need to invest in basic infrastructure as well. Then we could do more like a targeted funding and resource allocation. We need to also invest heavily in teachers training and capacity building. Our curriculum needs to be involved in reform as well. Then there should be a stakeholder participation and community engagement. Then lastly, we could talk about issues like innovative teaching pedagogies as well. So I hope that answers your question. Thank you. Over to you, Kusel.
Okay, great. Thank you for picking up that so quickly. I know you are almost on your way out, so I appreciate you jumping in for that. And okay, and then the second question that we had on the poll was, which of these good opportunities in EdTech, which of these are good opportunities in EdTech? And then we had personalized learning and global collaboration and resource sharing. And we have 75% of the participants voting for that. And then in terms of the second option was practicality, flexibility, and accessibility. And we have 56% of the respondents voting for that. And we had another opportunity, which was a replacement of teachers. I'm glad no one voted that as an opportunity. We do not want that to be an opportunity. So I absolutely agree with everyone that does not count as an opportunity. And then in terms of faster learning, we have 25% that have indicated that this is one of the opportunities that introducing digital tools into education kind of like aided up. So thank you so much for your participation. We will continue sharing this as we move on with our with our lesson, and also after the session itself, if you would still like to disseminate it or to participate in it. And so now I think it is fair now to hand over to Rhonda. Rhonda, we have already introduced you earlier as someone who's been a part of the GCE family when it comes to really advancing our advocacy on EdTech, and we appreciate that you have you've agreed to joining us today, and we're looking forward to learning so much from you. So I'm going to hand over to you. Let me know if you will be able to share your presentation, or you would like me to do that. Over to
hi,
you.
and I mentioned that I don't have a presentation. I think Vicky was making just a placeholder.
Yes,
and just a note that someone is coming to pick up a packet from me, and they just said that they were on their way. So just letting you know, I'll have to pause momentarily so that I can provide that to them.
Okay, sounds good. You can go ahead.
All right, great. So good afternoon, everyone. I'm glad to be here with all of you, a group of passionate youth advocates dedicated to transforming education in sub-Saharan Africa. My name is Dr. Rhonda Zalesny Green, and I'm based in Spain, between Spain and the UK, but I'm originally from the United States, and as you can see from my photo, a Black American. So I have a lot of experience with using technologies, not only in education, but also with a particular focus on low resource environments. And it's been my philosophy that, you know, if you can make technology and education work in low resource environments, like many of the places in the United States, you can also do the same anywhere else. So today I'm here to talk about a revolution that's reshaping the landscapes of classrooms and libraries, not only globally, but also right there in Africa. The work that I did with GCE, as was mentioned, focused quite heavily on investigating the use of educational technologies, particularly in the context of the pandemic. And even as the pandemic has, well, I don't know that it's moved on, but people have stopped worrying about it. We're still learning more and more that people are willing to use technology in education now that they know the possibilities after being forced to during the pandemic. So in the next 15 minutes, what I'm going to do is kind of walk you through the background of digital education to know what it means, some of the tools that are driving the expansion of digital education, and then also how digital education can transform the educational experience for youth in Africa, including yourselves, or even the people that you might through this this lecture. I guess keep an open mind to think about the possibilities, even as you think of the challenges. I came, you know, right at the hour and heard some conversations that, you know, where people were asking about the different challenges. And if there's one thing that I must remind everyone is that necessity is the mother of all invention. So I think the sky is the limit, and particularly with Africa being the youngest continent, there's going to be even more opportunity on the horizon as the population grows. And 1 second, because they are here to get this packet, so please bear with me. Hola. Hola.
Apologies about that. I think we had Rhonda mentioned earlier that she was expecting a package. I think, as we said, benefits of technology. We can multitask. That also should be part of our responses. And so we're just gonna wait for just a minute until she gets back. Okay, so we have two participants that have their hands up, and maybe while we are waiting for Rhonda, we can just attend to
Sorry.
those
I
hands.
continue talking and I think maybe did someone mute me?
Are you back, Rhonda?
Yeah, I'm back. They just had to pick up the
Okay,
package.
right. Okay, no worries, no worries. I just thought, okay, while we were, so I'll then over to you.
All right, great. So as I was saying, in terms of the current landscape of education in Africa, one thing that's important to remember is that there's a rich tapestry of cultures, languages, and communities that make up the continent. And so while this diversity is definitely a source of strength, one of the challenges that is also presented is that because of this, education, particularly where languages are concerned, needs to be more diverse and even stronger. Because if we set aside the fact that there are like 4 major colonial languages that are spoken there, this is not the mother tongue of most people. So when thinking about digital education and the use of technology in education, English tends to be the predominant language. So if you're hailing from Francophone Africa, not only are you limited by the fact that most technologies are not going to be in local languages, they're also often not even in French. And so these are some of the things that overall affect accessibility. But accessibility is not just in language. There's also challenges in terms of physical access to education. So some people are forced to walk very great distances, or where they live might not have adequate transportation. And if you live in a remote or rural area, there may not even be schools where you are. So, this is not just about logistics. It's also about the fact that, the governments in Africa, due to colonialism, were kind of hamstringed as well in terms of the resources that they have to provide for basic infrastructure such as that. When considering classrooms, there's also the issue of overcrowding. Some teachers may not be able to fully engage with every student because of the class sizes. I know personally that it was a challenge also recruiting for teachers to schools in rural areas because most people wanted to live in urban areas where there were more opportunities. So these disparities, these challenges, thinking about gender, thinking about education quality and so forth, these are all kind of, things that affect not just Africa, but in Africa, they are much more grave due to those circumstances, as I said, and as a part of a history of colonialism, and then also current challenges around governance. So when thinking about those challenges in terms of what digital education is, I don't know if my colleagues already shared a definition of this, but basically digital education transcends traditional learning by using technology to enhance and to facilitate the education experience. So it's not just that textbooks are made available through digital means or having a lecture like this online. Digital education can include, integrating digital tools and also innovative teaching methodologies similar to the polls that have been done during this presentation to make learning more interactive or accessible. So digital education, one of the things that I've noticed as a researcher, particularly from the perspective of teachers, this shift where teachers are not known as the single source of knowledge, where they're not supposed to control education completely, but rather to serve as a guide as people go on a learner-centered journey. This shift has been challenging for some people because they see it as, a potential for the loss of their jobs. But, I've been a teacher now for almost 20 years. And even as I've worked in technology and education, I've not yet seen a circumstance that would mean, okay, as a teacher, I would not have a job. So with this, one of the things I want all of you to think about as well is like how digital education can transform your experience as learners. So some of the ways that digital education has been enhanced, there are things like e-learning platforms and learning management systems. So platforms like Coursera or edX, or in Africa, there's a nice platform offered by GIZ called Atingi that has been really good in terms of offering access to courses and learning materials online. Sometimes with quizzes, video lectures, and things like that. Gamification is also very present in digital learning. So there are also educational apps and games. One of the things that my daughter, she uses online to learn is something called EMAT, where she's able to practice some math and some language work through an online system. We're even seeing things now like virtual reality. So Facebook or Meta, as well as Apple, have been releasing technology. So like goggles where you can imagine that you're somewhere else. So one of the uses of virtual reality in the United States, particularly by historically Black college or university, has been to take trips through history and to learn in real time about history without having to have a time machine. So one other perk of digital education as well is that it can blend modalities. So, right now, I'm actually tomorrow I have a driving test that I have to take. And one of the things that I'm able to do, earlier this morning, I went to the driving school itself, but this afternoon I'll attend online. So enabling you to blend the modality of how you learn, being able to give you a bit more flexibility, which in 2024, and particularly in the post-pandemic era, is something that is super, super important to have in mind. So when thinking about some of the key tools that are available in Africa, I will say that in my experience living and working in Africa as a teacher, but even as being a researcher, that whenever I talk about these various tools and platforms, I'm always surprised because there are so many people who do not actually or don't have an awareness of these tools despite being based in the continent. So some of the tools that I'm most familiar with, Ubongo, which is more for pre-primary education. They offer pre-primary education not only on TV, but also on phones, also on laptops and things of that nature. And it's really good because it's like Sesame Street, but a Sesame Street created by Africans and for Africans. Another excellent platform that's available primarily in Kenya, but I know that they're expanding, is Ineza Education. And this helps people to practice for their various exams. Another platform called ULesson is available in Nigeria, and acts very similar to Aneza Education in Kenya in terms of helping to prepare students, primarily secondary school students, for their various subjects. One tool that I'll probably mention that most people don't think about as being a learning tool, but it's one of my favorites is WhatsApp. So WhatsApp, for me, it enables people to create learning communities of practice. So for me, I'm in a group on WhatsApp called Black Women in International Development. And in that group, we share resources for professional development with each other. Some people, offer webinars that we do and join to learn from each other. And so it's really an opportunity to be able to transact with people for an educational purpose, but to have it right at your fingertips. So you're able to work asynchronously when you can share text, you can share audio, you can do all manner of things. And so it's also a pretty lo-fi way to be able to connect with people in terms of education. We also see things like mobile libraries as well in terms of being able to access books directly on your phone. So World Reader, which is an application that I did my PhD on in Kenya, also looks at helping people access books for free just by using their mobile phones. And I know from having taught in a few countries in sub-Saharan Africa that this is a challenge. And so again, this is, opening the space for possibilities and what can change. And I think that, in particular, as infrastructure improves in sub-Saharan Africa, there are going to be more opportunities than challenges as we move forward. And I think, a lot has been made of, we have these challenges, but I think we need more people thinking innovatively about how to circumvent them, particularly where education is concerned. So what I'd like to say to all of you as youth advocates for education in Africa, is that you're not just the leaders of tomorrow, but you're the change makers for today. So I think you have an opportunity as youth to work to bridge the gap between generations. So one of the things that remains such a big challenge is that when young people want to use their phones for learning in sub-Saharan Africa, it's still admonished. People are still like, oh no, you're not using that for school purposes. You're only using it for being idle or for wasting time or for doing something that you shouldn't do. So being able to show older generations the power of what's possible on phones when it comes to education is a really big thing that you all can do. I think another thing that you all might can be able to consider doing is thinking laterally or thinking outside of the box, as I mentioned, about how you can use a lot of the tools that are available. So I mentioned WhatsApp earlier being underutilized as a tool for learning, but this is something that can transform its purpose to be for more than just communicating with people. And then lastly, I think one of the things that you also can do is to organize workshops or training sessions to help people build digital literacy, because all of this that I talked about beforehand would simply not be possible if people are unable to use digital devices whatsoever. So I think that for those of you who are digitally literate, or at least, know your way around a phone or a laptop or a computer, this is also an opportunity. We have this expression, reach one to teach one. So meaning you take the opportunity to use your skills to help others and to set other people free. So with that, I'll end my presentation and take questions from anyone that might have them. Thank you.
Great. Thank you so much, Randa, for that informative presentation. I think you've shared a lot of great insights with us and the pointers in terms of like what actions can young people in different contexts actually take in terms of aiding this up, in terms of enhancing the use and adoption of technology in education.
Mm-hmm.
And even the practical ones that we think they're just for social engagement, I very like the examples that you're sharing about, being part of the community on WhatsApp that enhances learning. So I'm just going to go ahead and just open. We have a number of questions that popped up, obviously, as you were going through your presentation. But I would also just like to encourage everyone, if you've got any question that you would like to ask directly to Rhonda, please raise your hand, and I'm going to be skimming through these questions and see if anyone's that I need help with. Okay, so there is a question from Francis. It says, what are some of the successes will be expected in the next 2 years? Okay, so I'm not sure if you would like to speak more, Francis, on that question. I feel like it is not specific enough. So is it just successes on the adoption of EdTech? Rhonda, are you able to respond to that question, or you would like Francis to clarify it?
Yeah, probably some clarification.
Yeah.
Or like, Francis, do you mean what success do we expect to see in the next 2 years as a result of EdTech?
If you may, Francis, if you can just please raise your hand, I'll be able to allow you to speak. But I think to just move on, there is a hand up. Okay, Francis' hand is up, so I'm going to hand over to you. Francis, please clarify your question. You can unmute and speak, Francis. Okay, we can't hear you, Francis, but we're going to come back to you. Can you hear us? Can you try to raise your question again? Okay, we're going to go back to Francis at a later stage. There is a question from Atik. I'm just going to allow you, Atik, to pose your question. Please go ahead.
Hello?
Yes, go ahead. You may introduce yourself and ask your question.
Bonjour, comment vous allez? J'espère que vous portez bien. On est très content de la formation. Oui, nous remercions de cette formation.
Thank you so very much for the training session. I have asked my question in the Q&A. It seems that you've not seen it. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you. Can you please repeat your question?
Is there a translation?
D'accord. Je voudrais demander, est-ce qu'il y a des formations?
I wanted to know if you have training.
Okay, sorry, he'll need to repeat that. I didn't.
Please go ahead. I think I'm in the English channel. I'll be able to repeat the question if it's not heard. Can you just repeat?
Est-ce qu'il y a des formations?
Do you have training that are exclusively and specifically for vulnerable groups? Of course, when I talk about vulnerable groups, I'm talking about within the learners, but also the teachers or even the parents of these learners. Do you have any such type of training for vulnerable groups?
Yes, so my work in education technology, digital education has focused on girls, and then also people with disabilities, because I have a disability myself. So my work, typically when I'm not looking at or examining digital education from the perspective of people who live in low resource environments, which is also a vulnerability, I'm looking at it from a consideration of gender and also from ability. So, for example, for me with my disability, the presentation of the content needs to be in a certain manner in order for me to be able to effectively learn from that content. So it's, yeah, I have this training, and I don't know if that was your full question, but yes, I have this training.
Okay, great. Thank you so much, Rhonda. I think then we've addressed, because I think some of the questions were coming from Atik in the Q&A. So I'm glad he's been given an opportunity to verbally clarify his questions. And if there are any that maybe we missed or we did not relay the question properly, we can facilitate the process of following up on that.
Okay, great.
And I thought if there are any other hands up, okay. Francis, would you like to come in now? I am going to hand over to you to ask your question, and I hope you will be audible. Can you hear us? Francis, I have allowed you to talk. Are you able to ask your question? Okay. We're gonna move on. Can you hear Francis? I can't.
No, I can't hear him, but maybe he can type.
Okay. There's no new question in the chat box. So I think at this point we can just really go ahead and thank you so much, Rhonda, for joining us. I understand that you also have other commitments, so you might not be able to stay longer in the call, but if there are any questions that come up during the session that require us to follow up with you, we will gonna go ahead and do that. And thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you. And if anyone has questions after, I'm happy to connect with people.
Great. Amazing. Okay.
Okay. Thank you. Have a good day.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye. Bye. Okay. So with that session, I think we have come to an end to the first part of this session, which was really just about exploring different approaches into introducing and integrating EdTech in education. Now we're gonna move to the second part, which of course we're still under the topic of inclusive education, and now we are going to invite Mary, who has kindly also joined us today to share with us her experience in terms of the work that she is doing in Kenya, and also just to also encourage other young people here in this call on how do we actually take actions to make sure that inclusive education reaches everyone. So Mary, I would like you to come up and share your presentation with us. Over to you, Mary.
Hello, everybody. I'm excited to be here today. My name is Mary Maker. I am based in New York. I'm also a South Sudanese refugee from South Sudan who grew up in Kenya. And I'm a co-founder for Elevation Kakuma and a Goodwill Ambassador for UNHCR. So I'll go ahead and share my screen and start the presentation. Sorry, I have a lot of like tabs on. I don't know why I do that, but yes. So I'll put my timer on because that's how I work nowadays. Okay. Okay, so how do you win as a refugee? You know, how do refugees ever make it in fragile situations, in all the things that we've talked about, technology and education? How do we even ever win out of them from the word being a refugee? I grew up in this tiny camp. I don't know how I could do that. Kakuma refugee camp. It's tiny, but not so tiny camp, because this camp holds a population of close to 300,000 refugees from 10 plus communities and countries. Started in 1992, it was able to host refugees from South Sudan. And then later on, we've had Somalians, Eritrean, Congolese, Rwandese, Burundians, you can name it all, mostly from the Eastern Horn. And I grew up in this tiny camp, and education was the farthest thing in my brain, right? So you can imagine, like, leaving my home country in South Sudan and coming through the Kenyan borders for the very first time, and then there are no gunshots, and you feel this sense of peace. And for the first time, I'm taken to a small nursery school. I remember the name, Takwell Nursery School. And right there, I find 200 kids just like me, smooshed in one tiny classroom. Okay. And for us as kids, as children, we don't understand the concept of conflict, you know, of death, of fleeing. All we can remember are fun memories, but the moment we look at our parents' eyes, you know that they have gone through a different journey. So what is education for us? Is it a safe space? Are we running towards danger? Are we far from it? What does it mean for us, right? And I remember when my mom would drop me at Takwell Nursery School every morning, and I had to choose to either stay with her and do house chores or go to school and not even understand what I'm being taught, because this is the first time I'm being introduced to English and Swahili at the same time, and scribbling your name on sand, and all the kids together at porridge time, we're all holding each other, running to be served porridge, because there's hunger, there's malnourishment. But that is not something that we are putting in, because fragility is part of us. Education is something new and something I didn't want to take, okay? Because education meant assimilating. Learning new languages meant assimilating. And then the more I did that, the more I felt like I did not know where I was coming from anymore. Kakuma, as you can see, it's located in northwestern part of Kenya, semi-arid, near Uganda, near South Sudan, and Ethiopia. It's like that very corner of Kenya, and here there's livelihood, and we're all trying to survive. When I first, or like when I talk about like how do refugees win, here I am from Kakuma refugee camp in the little blue dress, and here I am at St. Olaf College in the United States, going to college for the first time after 5 years after graduating high school. I'm like, how do you win through this system of education? How does education start to become a new way of getting out of the camp and ending encampment? Many a times when I talk to people or when I talk to organizations, and when people think of refugees, they first think of, oh my God, we need to provide them basic needs. They need food, they need clothing. That you can name all of them, and that's a big problem, because that's really positive. But what gets to happen is we tend to end up providing the basic needs, and we end up not reaching the end of the pyramid. I'm talking about the Maslow hierarchy of needs, right? For a person to be fully indoctrinated to a community, or to feel like they can achieve self-actualization, is not just the basic needs, it's also safety, the sense of belonging, is esteem, and then we are able to reach self-actualization. So my question is, do refugees ever get to self-actualize? Through education, we tend to see this happening. And I'm going to talk about Elemisha Kakuma and why we started it. So when I first got to the camp as a child, I didn't know what education was going to mean for me, because education for most refugees is is a false promise that is given to you, but there's a dead end. I graduated high school in 2015, and immediately I realized that as a refugee, I could never get loans or anything. There's nobody in the government speaking up for us. We have no representative or anything like that. In the camp, we have 70+ organizations that are barely know, because as a refugee, you're so isolated from the people that are providing needs and things for you. So how do I ever make it to self-actualize? It will never happen. How do I get to develop talents and know that my talents are also appreciated in the community, while the corner that has been given to me is that title, the refugee, that only think of handouts and that's it. In the camp, I was doing a research a few days ago with the Harvard Law School and University of San Francisco. And we came to realize that in the entire Kenya, only 6 refugees have work permits. 6 refugees from a population of not only 300,000, but when you combine Kakuma refugee camp and the Dadaab, that is close to 600,000 refugees. 6 people get to have work permit. These people could be contributing to the economy. So what is the point of me going to school if at the end of the day I'm not going to ever work? I'm never going to get a work permit because of this title that I have to self-actualize. When I graduated, I knew that I was never going to go to college. So what I did, I became a teacher to young kids in the camp. Were I qualified? No. So how do these kids win when they sit for the KCSE, the Kenya Certificate of Secondary Education? How do they win when they're being taught by someone that is not a qualified teacher? How do they win when the school is divided into 2 sections? There's section A that starts from 6 a.m. to 12 p.m. and the other section starts from 12 p.m. to 6 p.m. And in each section, I have 7 streams of 10th graders that are filled in a classroom. Inside that classroom, we have 120 to 200 kids. And in that classroom, as I'm teaching them biology, I only have 7 textbooks. How do I give them homework? How do they sit for the Kenyan Certificate of Secondary Education? Will they ever make it to college? If I am the most privileged refugee that was actually able to graduate high school, why am I not in college? July is when the resources are not there and they notice it, they know there's a dead end, right? So every single time I would come to class and I'm so passionate, I'm like, okay, let's get to it. I'm going to teach you about food test today. We're going to test for starch, and we are in this tiny laboratory, and we're trying to test for starch. And the moment we use that one test tube that has been used in chemistry and physics classes, it turns from pink instead of blue-black. How do they win out of this system? How does education become a way for them to make it out and become countrymen and become people with talents and things that they can provide to the community? They can't. I saw this, I was broken because I was also in that dead end of trying to be the only 1% of refugees that will ever make it to tertiary education. So we started Elimisha Kakuma. Elimisha is a Swahili word that means educate Kakuma. When we started this program, we only needed 5 students because the 4 co-founders, we were all students in college with our teacher. So we didn't have resources, and it was during the time of COVID. We wanted 5 students, 100 applied. And it was one of the most heartbreaking interviews because they were all qualified. But how do we convince universities that these students are also fit, that their grades, if they have a C, that's an A? Think about it, the environment where we are growing in. So when we started Elimisha Kakuma, we took 12 students. They all got universities. And we were shocked as educators, as people trying to advocate for them to universities, because most universities were like, where on earth is Kakuma refugee camp? What if they don't come to survive here? They've never typed a day in their life. And we have to convince them, no, we're teaching them how to type. We're teaching them how to be in a rigorous curriculum. They can also do it. And finally, we made it. We had to learn under trees sometimes because the classrooms belonged to NGOs that would not allow us to be in it. And we did a lot of Zoom calls that broke up because we didn't have internet access. And by the end of that, These are some of my students that are currently in their sophomore year. The guy in the pink shirt, React, got accepted into UC Berkeley on a medical track from a refugee camp. Grace in the middle got accepted to Dartmouth, which is also like an Ivy League, currently doing computer science. And we have Pajok, who is at the University of Tulsa, also pursuing the degree. What access to education can do to refugee camps is that it starts to open doors for the possibility of kids in refugee camps to dream and to know that the camps, they're not meant to be in the camp. We come to the camp and we stay there for 1 month. 1 month turns into 10, into 20. You realize it's 20 years, you're going to die in there. You come of age in the camp, you become an adolescent, and after that, you realize that you're getting into your womanhood in a refugee camp without a purpose. So education gets to start opening those doors and those opportunities for all of us. Here's UC, here's Riak at the Golden Bridge as he's headed to UC Berkeley, and with the kids that that host him right now. Some of our students got accepted into Canadian University. And this just happened from 4 people deciding to come together to create access. We have a student at Carvin University, all the way from the camp, and this student didn't get accepted the first year, so took another year with us because some universities decided to take her in, but not with full financial aid. That's another problem. Most people don't understand refugees. How do you say, hey, I'm going to give you a scholarship. Can you afford the other $30,000? I'm like, hell no. I don't even have a bicycle or anything like that. How can I even afford that at the end of the road? But one of the most proudest moments for me is this student, Akon. She got accepted to University of Calgary, Alberta in Canada, and she started her own mentorship program. It's called Kakuma Empowerment Program. She currently mentors over 500 kids in the camp. The ripple effect that this get to do, the ripple effect that creating education and giving educational opportunities to refugees get to do is the ripple effect. And that's what I'm here for every single day, every single time. I'm going to stop my screen share so that I can actually interact with all of you. But just thinking of how can education end encampment? How can education end fragility within the camp? And it starts by when we create access, when we open doors to refugees, when we really understand who are refugees, when we include refugees in the global campaign for education. Because think about it, how many universities do we have in the world? If each university just opens an opportunity for 1 refugee, that in itself is a big change to the community, to the society. I felt passionate about it because I went through this life. I got to the camp as a kid, and that's all I knew. The campgrounds is all I ever knew. And to be able to struggle with identity and education at the same time, that shouldn't be something. At least let education be the opening remark, the opening to a new life to many refugees and the rebuilding of countries. That's all I have for you today.
Amazing. Thank you so much, Mary. That was mind-blowing. That was, I could hear the passion from your voice. I can tell the experience that you are sharing a story that is not just informed. I mean, the research is important, but this is your story. And you've posed a very important question. How do you self-actualize from a refugee camp? And in that, I think the first question that opening with that question and showing us through your presentation that education is actually what can enable you to self-actualize regardless of where you come from. And I think you've shared a lot of beautiful stories with us, and calling on GCE. I'm very proud to be part of the GCE movement, as education in emergencies has been part of our advocacy. It's the message that we stand for. It's part of our advocacy. It's logged into our advocacy actions. And to see the stories that you've just shared now, I can see the need, the relevance. And I think when you talk about inclusion, also what you mentioned is include refugees, include include those that are excluded. And I think that is the most powerful approach. And I feel like we are really, of course, in the right direction. And thank you so much for sharing such beautiful stories with us. It's just amazing to see how far you've come and how far you've gone. And I hope we have a lot of questions towards the end to engage you further on it. But now I am going to invite Linda as well to just share from the perspective of integrating gender. Like we said, today we are dealing with all the thematic issues that are critical and essential to GCE's advocacy, and we want to hear from the perspective of youth. So from you, Linda, we would love to hear what have you been doing as you are part of the UNESCO Youth SDG Network. How do we integrate gender in global advocacy? What practices can you share with us, and what lessons can we take away from there, from you? And then at a later stage, we will engage with our audience through a discussion. So, Linda, can I invite?
Thank you so much, and thank you for that brief introduction. My name is Linda. Unfortunately, I won't be turning on my video because of internet connection issues. I'm based in Uganda, and I'm a member of the UNESCO SDG for Youth and Students Network, but I also started a community-based organization called Tujifunze Africa Foundation that is based in Kamli District, which happens to be my home district. And we work to support girls and children with disabilities to access education. I would like to thank the GCE for the opportunity to interact with the students and youth leaders on this call. It's always a great pleasure to interact with young people and get to learn from one another. So today, I will be talking about gender mainstreaming in global advocacy and education or programming per se. Next slide, please. So the purpose of this particular module or session is to provide an overview of gender mainstreaming to youth and students and how it can be applied to global advocacy and education programs. And we'll be talking mainly about what gender mainstreaming is, the concept of gender mainstreaming, and how gender is applicable to education programs and advocacy. I know there's quite a lot of young people on this call that perhaps are running education interventions in South Africa or globally, and you could be thinking to yourself, what can I do, or what practices or actions can I take to mainstream gender in my intervention? So we should be talking about that briefly. Next slide, please. I start off this presentation by reminding us that education is a human right. And I go ahead to say that access to quality education is a human right, regardless of one's gender, race, ethnicity, socioeconomic background, and political affiliations, etc. I am African and a Ugandan, and I realize that so many children, youth in this country are not able to access education. One, because they're girls. Two, either because they have a disability. Three, they are in emergencies. Like Mary was sharing, it's hard to be a refugee in any country. And it's much harder when you are a girl or woman living in a refugee settlement. And I go ahead to say that no person should have their right to education infringed upon because of their gender. It's absolutely ridiculous for you to say an individual is not going to be able to go to school because they are girls or they are boys. Next slide, please. So in this slide, I briefly explain what the concepts of gender and gender mainstreaming are. But before I go ahead, kindly use the chat box. You can briefly share as well your understanding of these concepts, and then we can learn from one another. This particular session is about learning and interacting with one another, and you could be knowing things that I do not know, and it would be great to learn from you as well. So gender, we've had this concept quite a long time. People talk about gender equality, gender equity, gender mainstreaming, but what is gender? So gender are the characteristics of men, boys, women, and girls that are socially constructed, such as roles. We've heard of, in communities where I come from, there's sayings like girls are the ones supposed to wash plates, clean the house. Boys are supposed to go hunting or rearing cows, things like that. Those are gender roles and they're socially constructed. And we have behaviors like girls should sit a certain way, girls should speak a certain way, they shouldn't shout, they shouldn't talk like men. Those are all socially constructed behaviors or beliefs and roles that we are supposed to conform to, I must say. And there is also the concept of sex. Oftentimes people confuse sex with gender. So now sex, I didn't add it here, but those are the biological characteristics that make us male or female. So when you're born, your parents will say, oh, she's a girl because perhaps your reproductive organ is for female. Oh, she's a boy because your reproductive organ is for male. So that's the difference between gender and sex. So what then is gender mainstreaming? Gender mainstreaming is a strategy or approach to policy making that takes into consideration the needs and interests of men and women, boys and girls. And when I said that, it's not lost on me that we have key populations. We have people identifying as LGBTQ. So it also falls under this. We need to take into consideration their needs and interests while designing education programs or policies. And that entails the planning processes, the budgeting processes, implementation and monitoring and evaluating these processes. It's very, very important that we take into consideration those issues. Next slide, please. So when we talk about gender mainstreaming, what are some of those activities that we engage in? One of those is identifying gaps in gender equity. We need to recognize that, one, something is not right. There's a reason why perhaps girls in your community are not going to school and boys are going to school. Or there's a reason why boys in your community are not going to school and girls are going to school. Our recent statistics in Uganda, the recent UNEB statistics show a decline in completion rates at primary level and ordinary level. And people are attributing it to COVID-19, but we saw more boys drop out of school during COVID-19 and resorted to child labor. We have so many, in my community, we have so many boys engaging in sugarcane plantation. And that in itself is a challenge. Perhaps it's forcing us to think about the intersectionality of education and poverty. Why are we seeing more boys now dropping out of school than girls? What could be the issue there that we need to think deeply about and take into consideration? The other thing is raising awareness about inequality. So once you identify the challenge in the community, for example, period poverty, we have many girls that are not able to access menstrual products. So when you identify that as an issue to access education for girls, you go ahead and raise awareness about it. We are young people and youth leaders. We have social media. You can go and tweet about it, do an Instagram live, talk about it, let people know that in community X, these are the issues affecting girls' access to education. After raising awareness, you can promote and build support for change. The previous speakers emphasized the need for collaboration. I can't really emphasize it enough, but as young people, as students, for any idea you have or any advocacy issue you want to push across, you need to build support for change. You need to collaborate with people. You need to work with the private sector, with religious and cultural institutions, with the government, with your members of parliament, with fellow young people for you to effect that change. The other activity is providing resources and expertise to make the needed changes. We recognize that we need financing. So when people say there's need for gender responsive budgets or financing, for us to really effect the change we want to see on ground, we need funding. We need funding for these interventions. So you need to look at who is going to get you those finances. Is it the private sector? Is it the government? Is it the development partners? Who is going to get you those resources, and who can you work with? People with the expertise in the area that can help guide or collaborate with you in effecting that change, in ensuring that girls' education is advanced, or that you are actually mainstreaming gender in education. The other is monitoring results, evaluating progress, and providing information. The only way you're going to measure your impact or the progress of your intervention, whether it's at the community level, is if you monitor and evaluate the progress made by your intervention. Perhaps at the start, 500 girls were dropping off to school. After your intervention, after perhaps engaging the families or communities, or after offering scholarship opportunities for girls, you realize that the number has reduced. You're seeing more girls going to school because of your intervention. So monitoring and evaluating really plays a key role in gender mainstreaming. Next slide, please. In this slide, I go ahead to share some of the existing international instruments in favor of gender and education. So we're not just working out of the wedlock, the world, the UN, and the different agencies and bodies really recognize that we need to mainstream gender in education. I'm not going to go into details about them, but you need to know that, for example, the Universal Declaration of Human Rights of 1948 really provides for the universal respect and observance of human rights and freedoms. And those apply to women and girls, boys and men, and all other key populations by the mere fact that they are human beings. I think we tend to forget that before the gender, the socially constructed beliefs, norms, and practices about what men and women should do, we forget that people are human beings first. But the mere fact that they are human beings, they are entitled to every right you can talk about: right to food, right to healthcare, education, and all the other rights you can talk about, shelter, and so many other more. We have the UN Convention on the Elimination of All Forms of Discrimination Against Women, commonly called as, or commonly referred to as CEDAW, which calls for promoting access to education and scholarship for women and girls at all levels. It also calls for addressing gender stereotypes in education, among others. We've heard of issues whereby in some schools, in most of the schools, girls are not allowed to take on STEM subjects because they are girls or they're believed to be weaker academically, which is not true. So this particular instrument calls for addressing gender stereotypes in education and ensuring that girls are really included and actually learning and taking on the subjects of their choice. We have the UN Convention on the Rights of the Child, Article 28 on promoting the right to education for children. It really explicitly explains why we need to protect and promote the right to education for every child. And we often forget that girls are children, just like their male counterparts. So we need to uphold these legal and existing international instruments, but also at the national level. There's quite a number of instruments. For example, in Uganda, we have the Gender and Education Policy. We have our national constitution. Perhaps in your respective countries as well, you have some of these national policies and instruments that guide gender mainstreaming in education. They may not really explain it in detail, but the mere fact that they say every human being in Uganda has a right to education, that in itself is enough, regardless of their faith, whether they're Muslim, Anglican, Christian, they are entitled to the right to education. Next slide, please. I also wanted to highlight also the SDGs as one of the instruments really that is guiding gender mainstreaming in education. And SDG 4, target 4.5, I think, that talks about gender equality and inclusion in education. We cannot talk about achieving all the other 16 SDGs if we do not invest in the education of girls and boys. I'll emphasize boys as well, because as you look at the statistics from a UNESCO report, from the Global Education Monitoring Report, which is commonly known as GEM, it shows that over 128 million boys are out of school, and over 122 million girls are out of school. Again, it poses a question: what are those issues forcing boys out of school? Why are we seeing more girls in school? One would say, oh, there's a lot of advocacy around girls' education, which could also be true. But what are those specific issues perhaps we're missing when it comes to boys' education? Why are we seeing more boys dropping out of school? And so we need to think deeply about those as advocates for gender mainstreaming in education. It's important. Why gender mainstreaming? I did share some of the statistics here to show you that this is a reality on ground. When UNESCO says 250 million children are out of school and 128 of those are boys, 122 million of those are girls, These are human beings. And I've already said, these are human beings that have dreams. Mary was talking about living in emergencies in Kakuma refugee settlement. Those are human beings. These people with dreams, they can contribute to development. They are children. They are people whose right to education is infringed upon every day because they are refugees. So when you talk about this 250 million, just don't look at the statistic. Just look at the people. See 250 million people that are not studying because of various reasons that we can actually address. 99 million youth globally are illiterate, 56% of this being women. Again, I said, look beyond the statistic. See people, 56 million women are illiterate globally. How are they able to contribute to development? How will you employ them if they can't even write or count? These are some of the injustices we need to really, really address. And Angai estimates that 115 million children and adolescents experience school-related gender-based violence. And school-related gender-based violence is talking about sexual harassment, bullying, emotional abuse, and all the other forms of abuse that happen in school. Unfortunately, many of us are not talking about it. And yet, many children, especially girls, are bullied in school because of their gender or the way they look. And that pushes them out of school. So some of the statistics about school dropout rates is because of school-related gender-based violence. Yet, if we mainstream gender and address gender-based violence within the school setting, would ensure more children stay in school and learn from safe learning environments. And then another statistic is that many girls continue to miss school for 4 to 5 days of schooling. Some go up to 6 to 7 days, that's a week, of schooling every month due to a lack of menstrual supplies while on their periods. It's sad to say that this is a natural thing. People menstruate every month. It's natural. Unfortunately, governments are not doing enough to support girls with menstrual supplies to enable them stay in school and learn. And of course, Education Cannot Wait estimates about 220 million children, adolescents, and youth in emergencies and protracted crises to be out of school, with majority of these being girls. Again, I refer us to Mary's story, where she said many children in emergencies in Kakuma. I've worked in Mvepi refugee settlement, and I could see, that's in Uganda, and I could see many children, many girls not able to go to school because their families are not able to afford. And those that go to school are bullied. What I'm talking about, school-related gender-based violence. Many of them are sexually abused. Many of them are defiled, end up getting pregnant and drop out of school. And these are issues we need to think deeply about and address. Next slide, please. So why is gender mainstreaming in education important? Why are we even talking about it? Why did GCE labor today to bring us here to talk about gender mainstreaming? It plays a critical role. I just put a few advantages here for us to reflect or follow. Gender mainstreaming plays a critical role in addressing inequalities and discrimination in education, consequently promoting gender equality. It plays a key role in achieving SDG 4 and the other 16 SDGs. It's also central in supporting the most marginalized groups, especially girls, to access education. Without gender mainstreaming, we will not see girls, for example, with disabilities going to school because we're not taking into consideration their unique needs and the barriers affecting their education. But with this approach, we are able to ensure that there's equity and that every child, especially girls, are able to go to school and learn. It increases enrollment levels for both girls and boys in school. Now, gender mainstreaming does not only, again, increase enrollment levels, but also ensuring that schools are safe and healthy for both boys and girls and key populations, that way they're able to learn in healthy and enabling environments. And then creates equal opportunities for participation in leadership. We all know the role education plays in building confidence, self-esteem, but also exposing our minds and hearts into taking up space. And leadership is one of those. So it creates an opportunity for both girls and boys to participate in leadership. Next slide, please. So the question is, how is gender applicable to education programs and advocacy? I know that many of us are running or designing programs at organizational level in our respective countries, in our organizations, but also many of us are engaged in education advocacy at the international level, even the national level. So how is gender applicable to education programs and advocacy? I've said through research, we need data to inform gender mainstreaming and advocacy around supporting girls and boys to access education without necessary data and statistics. It's hard to back up our argument and say, oh, this number of girls and boys are not able to access technology that way, they're not able to learn. COVID-19 showed us that many people, many children were not able to learn because they couldn't access devices, for example. So now when you conduct research, you're able to tell how many of those are girls, how many of those are boys, how many of those are girls with disability, how many of those are boys with disability, in what contexts, are they in emergencies, are they in rural communities? That way you're able to design data-informed policies. It's very, very central for us to think about the role of data in gender mainstreaming in education. The other is programming. It's very important for us to apply an intersectional lens, really taking into consideration the issues affecting girls and boys when it comes to education in our programming. While you're planning, implementing, and monitoring and evaluating, you need to design programs that are addressing those barriers affecting boys and girls' access to education. And I give examples like providing sexuality education to both boys and girls. I come from a district with high levels of teenage pregnancy and child marriage, and we still have a government that is saying, no, we cannot provide contraceptives or sexuality education because we will be okaying the practice of sexual unions, if I must say. But this is happening. Many girls are dropping out of school every day. So we need to provide sexuality education. We need to provide design interventions that are really addressing some of these barriers. I talk about school-related gender-based violence, address GBV within the school settings, and how it affects girls' performance in school, girls' esteem. We need to think deeply about some of these issues. And then I talk about supporting both girls and boys to take up STEM subjects. Again, I did talk about this earlier, but there are schools in most of our countries that think physics, math are for boys, that girls should take up arts, history, English because, oh, they write beautifully than boys. That's not true. We need to encourage both boys and girls to take up STEM subjects. Advocacy on gender responsive budgeting, I did talk about this. We are not going to be able to achieve gender equality or gender mainstreaming if we do not have financing for all the interventions and policies on gender in education. So we need to advocate for gender responsive budgets. Then advocacy on inclusive curricula. We need to ensure that the content consumed by our students in textbooks, storybooks is not really perpetrating gender stereotypes, continuing to depict girls as the weaker sex. Continuing to, I'm trying to get the right word, to show us that, oh, it's okay for girls to go fetch water in the morning, early in the morning before they go to school, while their boys are going to school. And that's why you're seeing many girls come late to school or absenteeism among girls because of these negative gender roles that are actually reinforced through the curricula. So we need to think deeply about that as well. Next slide, please. Issues of staffing, we need to as well advocate for recruitment of more female teachers within our schooling, not only as teachers, but also as head teachers. You realize there's more schools with more male, that are male-headed, as opposed to female-headed teachers. And yet, there's data that shows that more female-headed schools have an increase in enrollment for girls, especially at secondary level. So we need to ensure that governments are actually recruiting more female teachers. And important to note, there's also, we need to also think about ensuring that governments are recruiting more female, we call them senior women teachers. There are schools in Uganda that do not have senior women teachers. And those senior women teachers are the ones that you used to provide us with sanitary pads. When you have issues, you go to them and, for counseling. So for schools that have more men than women, it's quite difficult to have senior women teachers or senior men teachers, if that's even a concept. But having senior women teachers to address the HR needs of girls within the school is very, very important. But it comes from staffing. It comes from recruiting more female teachers. It's very, very important. It's a gender issue, by the way. We cannot mainstream gender in education if we have 90%, for example, just giving an example, 90% being male-headed schools or having more male teachers than female teachers. We need to have equality there. The other is provision of wash facilities in schools. We need to have changing rooms and toilets for girls and boys. I'm telling you, in Uganda here, the schools you'll go to for school outreach, and you will realize that there's one toilet being used by both girls and boys, and that in itself is unhealthy. But it shouldn't be the norm. It's wrong on many levels. That's why some girls are dropping out of school. I'm sorry, I'm rushing through the slides. That's why some girls are dropping out of school, because they don't have changing rooms to use well on their periods. They can't access wash facilities, clean running water. We need to change that. If we're to mainstream gender into education, we need to think deeply about provision of wash facilities within the school settings. And then using gender inclusive language. We need to avoid phrases such as you are weak like a girl, boys are not supposed to cry, you can't walk like that. And these phrases are usually used in the school setting, even communities. We've seen many boys struggle with mental health problems within the school settings because there are boys not allowed to talk about these issues. They're not supposed to cry. They're not supposed to confide in anyone, which is wrong. So we need to use gender inclusive and sensitive language. The other is mixing boys and girls in education activities, especially co-curricular. You'll see in my case study that as an organization, one of the things we've taken up is to engage both boys and girls in cricket, because we believe that we need to have inclusive sport. Girls can play cricket. It's not for boys alone. So we need to think deeply about some of these issues. And that's something you can do in your community, in your school. If you've been having football for only boys, create a football club for girls. They can equally play. Next slide, please. I'm sorry, I'm trying to run through my slides quickly. So I did mention in my introduction that I run a community-based organization called Tujifunze Africa Foundation, and we are based in Kamali District. And we are working to increase access to gender responsive and inclusive education for children with disabilities and girls. And so I posed the question, how are we mainstreaming gender in our education projects? We engage in both boys and girls in cricket. I did talk about that briefly. And we're using it as a tool to raise awareness about school-related gender-based violence. Every time we have these training sessions, we do train kids or children about GBV, the forms of GBV, and how they can address GBV within the school setting, but also their communities. So we're using cricket and we're engaging both boys and girls. And then addressing school-related gender-based violence, building capacities of both boys and girls to address SRGBV. In most of our interventions, I've also noticed that each time we work with boys and girls, it's easier. We see more impact as opposed to working with one gender, as opposed to working with only girls, because we're having conversations in the community and people are saying, oh, you know who impregnates the girls? It's the boys. So every time you only have interventions focusing on girls, you miss out the perpetrators. You need to work with both of them to address these forms of GBV. The other thing we're doing is fighting period poverty through provision of menstrual supplies. It's very, very important. We cannot talk about gender mainstreaming in education without recognizing that girls struggle with accessing menstrual products to stay in school and learn. And then building girls' agency and voice to speak up on issues that directly affect them. It's important that we build the capacities of girls to take up space, to take up ownership on issues that affect them. Let them speak about their struggles. Let them speak up. If it's education and they're having issues, we're giving them that opportunity to speak up, but also participate in deriving solutions, not just speaking up. We believe that girls are key partners in taking action on issues that directly affect them. The other thing we're doing is supporting girls with disabilities access education through scholarships. Again, it's not gender mainstreaming if it's not employing an intersectional lens. We need to think deeply about that. That many girls, yes, there are girls, but also on grounds of disability, many of them are not able to access education. So we need to think deeply. Our toilets, for example, inclusive, do they have ramps? Are they able to use do they have access to wheelchairs, to access those toilets? What can we improve within the school setting, but also in our communities, to ensure that girls with disabilities are actually learning? And then, of course, the other thing we're doing is supporting pregnant girls and child mothers to return to school, because we believe that it is every girl's right to access education. In most communities or countries, it's hard for girls to return to school. It's difficult actually for even school heads to take them up when they've given birth, because they think, oh, you're going to spoil other students. It's like okaying the practice of getting pregnant, so they'll not allow them in school, which is wrong. They are still children, and human beings definitely have the right to education. Next slide, please. So I go ahead and share a few photos. One of the photos that one of our coaches, cricket coaches, engaging both boys and girls in one of the local schools. We're implementing the other one. It was a community outreach where we also engaged children. We provided menstrual supplies. Those are reusable sanitary pads in blue, and knickers to these girls to menstruate safely and healthily. We also, these are for students. This girl is in a school. So we provided menstrual supplies to girls in school, but also in communities to enable them menstruate safely and healthily, stay in school and complete. Next slide, please. And then here, I'd say advocating for gender responsive budgets, because it's important, like I said, but also I share a photo of one of the girls that is pregnant that we were talking to about returning to school and supporting her transition. It's not easy, but supporting her transition back into the school setting. Next slide, please. And then I did talk about building girls' agency and leadership. It's very, very important to create those spaces whereby girls are able to acquire information about their rights, build their self-esteem to speak up, demand for accountability, demand for action from the different duty bearers, starting from the school setting, really, demanding for action for the school leadership to set up some of this infrastructure and things we've been talking about, like wash facilities, toilets for both girls and boys within the school setting. So it's from building girls' agency and leadership that we'll see some of those actions and change happening within the school settings. Next slide, please. Or any questions? Thank you so much. I had so many slides. Sorry, I could have loved to go slower. I would have loved to go slower, but time. Thank you for your time, people.
No problem. Thank you so much, Lydia. That was so informative. And I think you've gone all out in answering all the questions that we had actually earmarked or set aside for this session. And, you know, what is gender mainstreaming? What does it mean when we talk about that in education? What do we mean when we talk about that in advocating, like in policy advocacy? And even gone as far as sharing the practices from the you know, from the work that your organization is doing on the ground. I think it's very, it's been great hearing from you. And I don't know if actually we have questions. I'm just gonna quickly check on that, but we are over time. And we had actually also planned to include the speaker from GCE, just to highlight what are some of gender mainstreaming advocacy activities that young people can be part of. So while I'm scanning for questions, Lydia, are you there to actually just take us through quickly in 2 minutes?
Yes,
we don't have enough time for our readers to stay long. So over to you, Lydia.
Okay. In 3 minutes, thank you so much, Kuselwa, and thanks so much to the previous speaker. I think you really did set the ground in terms of explaining gender and gender mainstreaming. What's left for me to say is just that the GCE is strongly committed to gender equality. So all that you were talking about is part of what GCE is already doing through its movement. And GCE is working through its members, including national education coalitions, regional coalitions, to try and ensure that all those practices you were talking about are addressed. So the GCE has developed a gender strategy, which was launched in 2021. And this gender strategy has 3 main aims. And it is these aims that youth organizations may also contribute to. I'm sure we have received the GCE gender strategy. If not, I'm sure it will be shared together with materials that will go out. There are quite a lot of things that the youth can also contribute to issues of gender transformative education, mobilizing the movement to end gender inequality in and through education, and then transforming internal and external spaces. So just to round this off, GC is already working through 23 national education coalitions, 11 of which are implementing advocacy activities, different advocacy activities, and then there are 12 that are strengthening the implementation of gender strategies that they've developed, and some are also working to just develop their own guiding documents in terms of gender equality. I don't want to take much time, but just to end by saying the GCE also is a gender learning community. Please just also go and have a look at the gender learning community. There are resources there that you can also utilize. I would like to stop there in the interest of time. Kuselwa, over to you.
Thank you so much, Lydia. I appreciate that. So there is a question if we are going to share the resources and the documents from this learning, from this session. Definitely we are going to send a follow-up email, and I will like to invite you as well. In that email, there's going to be a survey that we would like to get your feedback on how much you have actually gained from this session, if there's anything that we should improve for our next learning session. So that will also include a link for you to download all the resources, including this recording. And I think you, Linda, your hand was up to probably address that, and I see now your hand is down. So there are no other questions, and we're actually out of time. So I would like to thank all our panelists with so much information, having shared so much knowledge with us. I think we have set the ground so high in terms of like the youth-led advocacy on these 3 thematic issues and inclusive education that we've addressed today. I think the sky is the limit. We have so much to take forward, and I think we're just going to continue making sure that the GCE youth-led advocacy is informed by many voices and including those that are excluded. And I love that has been really highlighted very well from these learning sessions. And yeah, so before I end, Linda, I see your hand is still up. Would you like to just address something quickly?
No, it's just a question. Shall we be taking a group photo? Accountability purposes.
Okay, are you all able to enable your cameras? Let's see. I would love to have a group photo. Can everybody just switch on their cameras? Wait, I think my view is also not okay. I only see a few.
The participants won't be able to do that. They need to be promoted in order to switch on their videos.
Okay, can we have all the... Okay, I think some of our speakers have left. Sorry, Linda, I don't think we're going to be able to do that. But yeah, maybe we can just, the few of us, maybe you can just switch on your camera, Linda, then we'll go ahead and take the photo. Okay, I've got one from my side, and I'll share it with the resources. Thank you so much. And so thank you, Mary. Thank you, Linda. And who else is still on the call? Okay, I think some of our speakers have left the call, but we appreciate your time that you've taken off your busy schedule to come and share your experiences as well, your knowledge and your expertise in these thematic issues that we're dealing with today. And we hope we can continue engaging you on youth-related matters. And also, I would like to thank the interpreters that have stayed. I mean, they were not aware that this call is actually going to take more than 2 hours, but we appreciate your support and staying on and ensuring that we continue being available to everyone. And then we have our next session, and our last one next week. It's on the 5th of April on Tuesday, and that one will focus on legal frameworks. I think if I am right, it is achieving education as a human right, and we are looking at international legal frameworks that are actually in place to facilitate that. So we will share more information about it as well in the upcoming week. For now, I think it's only fair to say bye, and thank you so much for being part of this youth-led learning community and the online learning program. Bye.
Bye.